I should have left the moment I saw the seating chart. But the name beside mine, Rachel Taylor, tucked quietly in the corner of a table full of strangers, wasn't what stopped me. It was the other name. The one carved in gold letters on the wedding cake, engraved on the invitation I never RSVP'd to, but still held in my bag. I didn't come to crash his wedding. But when they turned the spotlight on me, I knew there'd be no turning back. If you've ever been underestimated, dismissed, or laughed off by someone who thought they'd buried you in their past, this story might just hit home. If it does, go ahead and like and subscribe, because some stories are meant to be heard loud and clear, especially the ones that turn the tables. Now let me take you back to how it began. The ballroom at the Fairmont was drenched in expensive light. The kind of soft, golden illumination that flattened wrinkles, erased doubt, and made everything look like it belonged in a bridal magazine. I arrived 20 minutes late on purpose, clinging to the hope that I could slide in unnoticed, sign the gift book, smile politely, and leave. But fate, as always, had a sharp sense of humor. The usher at the door looked surprised to see me. I imagine he thought I wouldn't come. Frankly, so did I. The chairs in the ceremony room were already filled, the air heavy with floral perfume and whispered curiosity. I slipped into a seat at the back, my heart thudding in my ears. I hadn't seen Thomas in nearly 2 years. Not since the day he walked out of our shared apartment, my belly swollen with his child, his words colder than the January wind outside. I'm not ready to be someone's father, Rachel. You knew that. I'd rebuilt myself since then, piece by trembling piece. But the invitation, ivory with embossed lettering, had arrived like a ghost on my doorstep. A courtesy, maybe. A provocation, more likely. But I wasn't here to make a scene. I was here to remember why I had left all that behind. Or so I told myself. The ceremony passed in a blur of violin strings and carefully rehearsed vows. The bride, young, blonde, probably 24, wore a dress that screamed designer couture and a smile that hadn't yet learned to lie. Thomas looked the same, give or take the better tailoring and a new haircut. But when he caught sight of me near the exit, his jaw twitched ever so slightly. I took that as my small victory. At the reception, I found my name scrawled on a place card at table 9, tucked away, just as expected. The faces around me were strangers, a middle-aged couple with matching pearls, 2 bored-looking groomsmen, and a woman whose perfume threatened to suffocate me. I tried to eat the salad, tried to ignore the endless toasts and laughing guests. But something in the air prickled with static, that deep-down feeling of being watched. I glanced across the room and locked eyes with Thomas's sister, Janet Porter. Yes, that Janet Porter. CEO, multi-millionaire. A woman whose LinkedIn profile could humble empires. She hadn't spoken to me since I found out she was Thomas's half-sister. Not during the breakup. Not when her brother ghosted me and left me to deliver our son alone. And certainly not when I emailed Horizon Solutions 6 months ago with my resume and never heard back. But now, she was here, watching, like she knew something I didn't. I was about to excuse myself for the bathroom, possibly forever, when the MC announced the best man's toast. A tall, smirking man with slicked back hair and a glass of whiskey strolled up to the microphone. I didn't catch his name, but I'll never forget what he said. You know, when Thomas told me he was getting married, I couldn't believe it, he began, to laughter. I mean, this is the same guy who once said, marriage is just filing your taxes in pairs. But then again, we all grow up, right? More laughter. I shifted in my seat. He kept going, some story about college pranks and strip clubs. I tuned out until I heard him say, and who could forget that one girl? You know the one, right, Tom? He winked toward the head table. The crying one. From back in Boston. Man, I swear, she was like a tragic country song. Tears and belly and everything. People laughed. Not everyone, but enough. I felt the heat rise up my neck like a fire alarm. My hands curled into fists beneath the table. The woman with the choking perfume let out a cackle. Thomas didn't laugh, but he didn't stop it either. And that's when the chair beside me scraped back. Janet Porter stood up, sleek in slate blue, her presence as commanding as a storm front. The room quieted instantly. She didn't take the mic. She didn't need to. Her voice carried, clear and razor-edged. Let me say something, she said. Not as Thomas's sister. Not even as Horizon CEO. Just as a woman who's seen what cowardice looks like when it tries to wrap itself in jokes. Her gaze swept the crowd and landed on the best man. You're not funny. You're small. A murmur ran through the crowd like a tremor. And for the record, she continued, turning toward me now, her tone softer but resolute. The woman you're mocking is 10 times the human most of you will ever be. She didn't walk away from her responsibilities, she carried them. Through job rejections, through long nights alone, through judgment and condescension just like this. Then her eyes found Thomas. Cold, measured. And she's the mother of your son, Thomas. Gasps scattered like breaking glass. I sat frozen, heart in my throat, breath shallow. Someone knocked over a wine glass. Somewhere in the back, a woman muttered, "Oh my God." Janet didn't blink. You think this day marks your beginning, Thomas? It doesn't. It marks the end of my silence. And with that, she turned and walked out. I don't know what came over me, but I stood and followed. Something had shifted. Something had snapped. And whatever came next, I wasn't going to sit quietly anymore. The silence after a public reckoning can be deafening. I thought that night at the wedding was the end of the story, but it was only the fuse. Because when someone like Janet Porter walks out of a room with ice in her voice and fury in her spine, she isn't just making a point. She's setting something in motion. And when her past walked through the door moments later, the only thing louder than the truth was the fallout. We didn't even make it to the parking lot before a second wave of whispers began building behind us, like a rising tide of stunned disbelief. Janet walked quickly, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor, but I kept pace beside her, still unsure if I was supposed to follow, or if I just couldn't do anything else. A valet offered to bring her car around, but she waved him off with a curt shake of her head. She needed space, not service. She didn't say anything for the first 2 blocks. Boston was a blur of headlights and cold wind, and I was too shaken to speak. Too unsure of whether I'd just witnessed an act of personal vengeance, professional fallout, or something far more complicated. When she finally stopped, it was in front of a quiet storefront with dark windows and a closed sign flicked outward. A boutique cafe, if I remembered correctly. One of those artisanal places that closed before sundown to protect its exclusivity. I shouldn't have done that in there, Janet muttered, her arms crossed tightly against the wind. I'm glad you did, I replied. She looked at me then. Really looked. You shouldn't be. There was a sudden rawness in her voice. She wasn't angry anymore. She just looked tired, like the performance had cost her more than she expected. I embarrassed you, she added quietly. No, I said, shaking my head. Thomas embarrassed me. You just said what needed to be said. Janet exhaled sharply, almost a laugh. That's what scares me. Before I could ask why, the sound of approaching footsteps broke the moment. I turned and saw him, a tall man, early 40s maybe, in a tailored charcoal suit and no wedding ring, stepped out of a sleek black car across the street and strode toward us with calm, deliberate purpose. His hair was slightly tousled, like he'd run his fingers through it on the way over, and his eyes, dark, unreadable, were fixed on Janet. Still setting fire to ballrooms, I see, he said mildly, stopping just a few feet away. Janet didn't flinch. You're late. And you're reckless, he countered. Then his gaze flicked to me. You must be Rachel. My stomach dropped. I didn't recognize him. But something about the way he stood there, with quiet authority and the edge of old resentment hiding in his smile, made my skin prickle. I'm Daniel Mercer, he said. Thomas's brother. Of course there was another Mercer. Janet said nothing. Her silence was telling. I saw the video, Daniel continued, pulling his phone from his coat pocket and waving it lightly before tucking it back inside. It's already on Twitter, on TikTok, on everything. You really outdid yourself this time, Janet. She turned to face him fully. So you came to do damage control? No, he said. I came because I told you it would come to this. And because I'm tired of cleaning up after everyone else's lies. My heart thudded louder in my chest. What does that mean? I asked, my voice quieter than I wanted it to be. Daniel looked at me, then at Janet. Have you told her? Told me what? I demanded. Janet's jaw tightened, her posture suddenly steel straight again. But she said nothing. I'll take that as a no, Daniel replied. He reached into his coat again, this time pulling out a folded envelope. I didn't come here to pick a fight, but you deserve to know something, Rachel. I took the envelope with trembling fingers, my name scrawled across the front in handwriting I hadn't seen in over a year. Familiar, stiff, controlled. Thomas sent this? I asked. No, Daniel said. He didn't have the guts. I opened it carefully. Inside was a photograph of Lucas, taken from a distance. He was at daycare, our company daycare, the one Horizon provided. The timestamp in the corner was from 3 days ago. My blood turned to ice. "You've been watching us?" I hissed. "No," Daniel said, holding up his hands. "But someone has. And they sent this to me." Janet snatched the photo from my hands. Her eyes scanned it and narrowed. "This isn't your style." "It's not," Daniel agreed. "But it is Thomas's." "Why?" I asked, barely able to speak. "Why would he?" "Because he knows his time's running out," Janet said flatly. "He's trying to scare you. Maybe scare me. Or he's planning something," Daniel added. "And he wants you both off balance when he makes his move." I backed away from both of them, heart pounding in my throat. "You said you didn't come to fight," I said to Daniel. "So what did you come for?" He looked at me with a strange expression. "Regret, maybe. Or something more dangerous." "I came," he said, "because it's time someone told you the truth about what Thomas did. Not just to you, Rachel, but to all of us." The air between the three of us was suddenly charged, a triangle of secrets that stretched farther back than I'd ever imagined. And as Janet folded the photo back into its envelope, her hands no longer trembling, I realized something else. This wasn't just about embarrassment or closure. This wasn't even about me anymore. Something bigger was unraveling, and I was in the center of it. The cafe lights flickered back on an hour later, long after the staff had locked up. Janet had keys. Of course she did. She poured coffee without asking and handed me a cup like it was armor. Across from us, Daniel sat quietly, his gaze flicking between the envelope on the table and my hands, which trembled no matter how tightly I curled them around the mug. "I'm not here to defend Thomas," Daniel said, "but you need context. And context, as ugly as it is, explains a lot." He told us everything. How Thomas had nearly tanked one of Horizon's major partnerships years ago through a string of reckless deals and workplace scandals. How Janet had shielded him again and again until she couldn't anymore. How their father had bailed Thomas out with one final ultimatum: leave the company quietly or have everything exposed. And then Thomas disappeared. Not just from Horizon, but from everyone. Until Rachel's name came across a resume, and Janet recognized her. "You were already more than qualified," Janet said softly. "But I hesitated. Not because of your ability. Because I wasn't sure if helping you was about you, or about my guilt over him." "I didn't want your guilt," I said. "I know," she replied. "You made that clear. Which is why I trusted you with more than the job." Daniel leaned forward. "He's coming back. I don't know what he wants. Custody, reputation, control. But he doesn't get to show up now and rewrite history. Not if we face him together." The room was quiet for a long moment. Then I nodded. "Okay. But if he wants to see Lucas," my voice caught, "it'll be on my terms. Not his." Janet raised her mug. "To that, I'll toast." We stepped outside into the cold just as the city's first snow began to fall, soft and slow. Somewhere behind us, the past was still there, watching. But beside me stood two people who had once been part of Thomas's story and were now part of mine. And in my arms, a future that deserved better. I pulled my coat tighter and whispered into the wind. "We're not afraid of you anymore."